The Big Bang. In 1947, the British Navy set off one of the biggest non-nuclear blasts in history. They blew up 6,800 tons of leftover munitions on a windy rock in the North Sea. The blast, called Operation Big Bang, wiped out a Nazi naval base. But what if it destroyed something much older and much more important? What if that island, Heligoland, wasn't just a fortress, but a remnant of Atlantis? Today, Heligoland is a quiet group of islands with red cliffs and rough waves, about 28 miles off the German coast. But for the Nazis and a fringe group of archaeologists, it was sacred land. They believed the island was linked to the lost city of Atlantis. Heligoland means Holy Land, and perhaps in some forgotten epoch, it was. Heinrich Himmler, leader of the SS and the Ahnenerbe, a Nazi group that studied ancestral heritage, believed in a prehistoric Aryan race. He thought Atlantis was real, and that it was German. Himmler told the Ahnenerbe to study Heligoland. He wanted proof. Healing springs, old ruins, anything that matched Plato's story. Divers went to an underwater reef called the Steingrund. They said they saw stone floors, walls, and even a vault under the sea. Some sources say Himmler believed Heligoland used to be 5 or 6 times bigger. He thought the lost city might still be down there. After the war, a priest and archaeologist named Jürgen Spaneth took up the idea. He'd been a member of the Nazi Party. Spaneth believed Heligoland had once been part of Atlantis, and that the people of Atlantis were ancestors of the Germanic tribes. He argued that Plato's ring-shaped capital fed a landmass near Heligoland that he called Basileia. He also claimed the Atlanteans were the Sea Peoples, fierce raiders who appeared in Egyptian records around 1200 BCE. In those records, some warriors carry round shields and wear horned helmets. Spaneth tried to fix Plato's timeline, too. Plato said Atlantis fell 9,000 years before the Greek statesman Solon first heard the story. Spaneth said those years were actually lunar months. That would place the disaster around 1230 BCE. He blamed a comet strike in the North Sea. In his view, survivors from the north became the Sea Peoples who later attacked the Mediterranean. To prove it, Spaneth led his own dives around Heligoland. He said his teams found pieces of walls, paved floors, and anchor stones on the seabed. Divers also reported white, red, and black stones, colors Plato links to Atlantis' buildings. Spaneth argued the island's golden deposits of fossilized tree sap called amber could be orichalcum, the legendary metal said to be used throughout Atlantis. He even linked the local god Phosite to Poseidon, saying a temple to Poseidon once stood on the lost island. To Spaneth, everything fit. Northern bronze swords, horned helmets painted on Egyptian walls, and amber-rich ruins under the sea. Together, he said, there were signs of a drowned North Sea civilization, remembered for 3,000 years. Then came the Big Bang. On April 18, 1947, British engineers blew up more than 90,000 shells, 4,000 torpedo warheads, and 9,000 depth charges inside Heligoland's submarine bunkers. The explosion made a huge crater and blasted away the island's southern tip. Officials called it a symbol, the end of Nazi militarism. But some think it was more. If any proof of a sunken civilization lay under Heligoland, it may have been destroyed that day. By accident, or on purpose, the last trace of Atlantis, if it ever existed, might have vanished in a mushroom cloud of salt and stone. A massive statue in the Atlantic. In the 1400s, Portuguese explorers reached Corvo, the northernmost island of the Azores in the Atlantic Ocean. High on a windy volcanic cliff, they found something no one expected. A huge statue carved from one block of stone. It showed a man in a Moorish-style cloak, riding a horse without a saddle. One hand held the horse's mane. The other hand was raised, index finger pointing out toward the open sea, west. Below the statue, strange letters were carved into the rock. Sailors tied ropes around their waists and lowered themselves down the cliff to copy the writing, but the marks were too old and worn to read. King Manuel the First ordered a drawing of the statue and sent a team to bring it to Lisbon. They broke it during the move. A head, an arm, a foot, and the horse's head were said to sit for days in the royal treasury. And then they disappeared. The drawing was also lost, but several writers described what they saw. The most important was the chronicler Manuel the First, who recorded details of the statue and its discovery in 1567. 200 years later, a violent storm uncovered the remains of a stone building on Corvo's shore. Inside, a cracked black pot held a pile of coins, Carthaginian gold and North African copper. They suggested that Mediterranean sailors, long before the Portuguese explorers, had passed the Pillars of Hercules and reached this island 800 miles into the Atlantic. This led some people to think the statue's finger wasn't just pointing, it was guiding. Ancient Carthaginians may have known about another land to the west. The writer Diodorus Siculus told of a green, fertile island they kept secret as a safe place if their empire fell. Was the statue pointing toward that land, toward America, or toward something even older? Atlantis. For centuries, some scholars and mystics have guessed that the Azores be the last peaks of a lost civilization. The islands rise from the mid-Atlantic ridge, close to where Plato placed Atlantis, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Renaissance maps sometimes label the Azores as the Islands of the Blessed, echoing stories of a great island that sank beneath the sea. Even the geography seems to fit the myth. Broad underwater plateaus spread around the islands, as if parts of a larger land once stood there. Undersea volcanoes, earthquakes, and shifting plates have reshaped the area many times, fueling the idea that the Azores could be the mountaintops of a sunken land. Other islands in the Azores also hint at a strange past. On Pico, researchers found stepped, pyramid-like structures aligned with the solstice. On San Miguel, a cave held an old scroll with Hebrew letters. And in 2013, sonar detected a possible sunken pyramid between San Miguel and Terceira, with its top only about 40 feet below the surface. So what should we think about Corvo's silent rider and mysterious inscription? Was he a Carthaginian sailor, a Phoenician scout, or something older, an Atlantean guardian carved in stone? We may never know, but we can say this. Long ago, someone stood at the edge of the known world and pointed toward the unknown. The missing pages. What if the last clue to Atlantis, a story said to be over 9,000 years old, was written down and then disappeared? Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, are our oldest sources about Atlantis. They describe a dazzling empire with great power and technology, followed by a sudden collapse. But most people don't realize that Critias stops in the middle of a sentence, right as Zeus calls the gods to judge the Atlanteans. The final line says, quote, "And when he had called them together, he spake as follows." Then, nothing. For a long time, people guessed Plato just stopped writing, but that explanation doesn't really fit. He lived at least 10 more years after finishing Critias and wrote the Laws, a huge work of 12 books. Additionally, the Critias we have was copied onto papyrus, which was usually used for final drafts after earlier notes on wax tablets. That suggests a complete version may once have existed. So why does the story end mid-sentence? A simple answer: the ending was lost. In ancient times, books were copied by hand. If even one page went missing, like the last sheet of a scroll, whole parts of a story could vanish. Historians point out that no ancient writer called Critias unfinished until almost 500 years later, when Plutarch complained about the missing ending. So the original might have been complete. There are other clues that something is missing. Critias promises details about a great war between Athens and Atlantis, based on sacred records that Plato's ancestor, the lawmaker Solon, supposedly saw in Egypt. But in the text we have, the war never appears. No battles, no speeches, only the build-up, and then silence. There's also a missing third dialogue called Hermocrates. Plato seemed to have planned the Atlantis story as a trilogy. The first, Timaeus, explains how the universe began and includes the first mention of Atlantis. The second, Critias, describes Atlantis at its height and how it became corrupt. The last part, Hermocrates, was never written down or has been lost. No one knows what it was supposed to say, but some believe it would have told how Atlantis fell, and maybe even included clues about its location. It's possible both Critias and Hermocrates were finished long ago, and were simply lost over time. If that's true, then somewhere, in a ruined library or a forgotten cave, or buried beneath layers of history, the final chapter of the Atlantis story may still be waiting to be found. The Pillars of Egypt. In the ruins of the ancient city of Sais, on the western edge of the Nile Delta, legends tell of a temple to the goddess Neith. Some say that long ago, the story of Atlantis was carved there in stone. Not just a tale, a history, one so old it came before the earliest Greek records. Most people know Plato's story of Atlantis. He said he heard it from the Greek statesman Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests. But the story didn't end with Plato. About 100 years later, a Greek thinker named Crantor traveled to Egypt in search of proof. He said he saw something amazing. We know this from Proclus, a writer in the 5th century CE who quoted Crantor. According to Proclus, Crantor didn't just repeat Plato, he backed him up. Crantor said the priest showed him pillars in Neith's temple. They were still standing in his time. On them, written in hieroglyphs, was the same story Plato told about Atlantis. Were these the original records? Did the Egyptians keep the truth of Atlantis in plain sight? Crantor thought so. He called Plato's tale bare history, not myth. Then the trail goes cold. Crantor's own works are lost. We only have Proclus's summary. It leaves us with a bold idea. Maybe the Atlantis story wasn't just a fable. Maybe it came from records once carved in stone, now missing or buried. So what happened to the pillars? The temple was destroyed long ago. Stones were reused. It's possible that any texts were lost to fire, flood, and war. Whatever the priest showed Crantor, if they did, has likely vanished. Modern scholars have doubts. Proclus wrote almost 800 years later and might have mixed things up. Crantor could have trusted the priests too much. He might have read Egyptian symbols like a Greek and seen what he wanted to see. Still, one question remains. Why did so many people, Solon, Plato, Crantor, Proclus, hold on to such a detailed story, if it was only fiction? An unexplained metal. For over 2,000 years, it was just a legend. A glowing red metal lost to time. Then a sunken ship off the coast of Sicily brought it back. In 2015, divers discovered a shipwreck filled with strange golden bronze bars. To the untrained eye, they looked like ancient treasure. To historians, they hinted at something far more exciting, a metal once thought to exist only in myth. Plato called it orichalcum, a mysterious alloy that covered the temples of Atlantis and marked the peak of a civilization more advanced than any known to the ancient Greeks. Its shine was said to rival gold, and its meaning went deeper than wealth. Orichalcum stood for power, lost knowledge, and a mystery that's haunted us for centuries. Could the discovery off Sicily finally prove that Atlantis was real? Or is it just another false trail in a search that's lasted millennia? Tests showed the metal was mostly copper and zinc, with small amounts of nickel, lead, and iron. In other words, brass, an alloy unknown to the Greeks in Plato's time. Could this be the lost orichalcum of Atlantis? Not exactly. These ingots are from the 6th century BCE, long after the time Plato said Atlantis was destroyed. The color and shine might match his words, but the timelines don't match. Still, they showed something important. People in the ancient world were making advanced metal alloys earlier than historians once thought. This discovery reopened the debate about what orichalcum really was, and what it might reveal about Atlantis' location. Some researchers, like E.M. Wishaw, point to ancient copper mines near Tartessos in southern Spain. They think Atlantean orichalcum, special alloy made there, tying the legend to a real Bronze Age trading power on the Atlantic coast. Others, like German archaeologist Jürgen Spaneth, say orichalcum was actually amber. He linked it to Heligoland in the North Sea, where large amounts of amber once washed ashore. Then there are the extreme outliers. Brazilian physicist Enrico Matievich argued that orichalcum came from pre-Columbian Peru, where the Chavin culture used red gold metals centuries before Plato. He even suggested Atlantis was in the Andes of South America. If Atlantis really existed, and if orichalcum was the metal that made it shine, then finding just one true piece of it, made in the same way and time Plato described, could do more than prove the legend was real. Its unique mix of metals might act like a clue, a breadcrumb that could help lead us to the lost world itself. Which of these lost artifacts do you think could actually lead us to Atlantis? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching Dark 5. Like and subscribe to continue exploring the greatest mysteries of this world and beyond.